Hello and welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today I will be covering UFO sightings and alien encounters in the state of Alaska. Before we get into it, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment as it really helps my channel out, and I very much appreciate it. If you want to check out more of my paranormal videos, you can click the pop-up on the top right corner for a full playlist. I also just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's been enjoying my videos, and I have now hit 1,000 subscribers. Thank you again, I can't believe it. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Strange lights over city seen by many residents. From the Anchorage, Alaska News, December 14th, 1970. Well, they may have been flying saucers. At any rate, nobody came up with a better explanation. They are the 5 bright red lights spotted flying in a kind of formation over Anchorage late Sunday. More than a dozen flying saucer observers called city police, the Anchorage International Airport Tower, and airport security to report the lights, which appeared around 9:30 p.m. at the southern end of town. Among the observers were 3 city policemen, one of whom estimated that the lights were flying at about 2,000 feet. Initial guesses that the lights were actually helicopters were quashed by the absence of any kind of sound, one of the policemen said. Whatever they weren't put up there by the Air Force. At least so said a spokesman who maintained that no Air Force aircraft were up in the wild blue yonder at that particular time. Furthermore, he said, the men in the Federal Aviation Administration Tower at the airport had spotted the lights, but their radar showed only the normal airline traffic, no little green men or little green ships. One suggested cause for the sightings, an inversion layer over the city, was quashed by a Weather Bureau forecaster who noted that while the layer was indeed present, it was too weak to produce optical illusions of that sort. Inversion layers apparently can cause some rather strange illusions, but, the weatherman said, not on Sunday night. So until somebody can come up with a good reason, Anchorage might as well keep checking out the skies at about 2,000 feet level, just in case. Six report UFO over Douglas last night. From the Alaska Empire, August 15th, 1973. Douglas Island, historically a favorite resting place for unidentified flying objects, was again the target of a mysterious UFO last night as at least 6 area residents reportedly spotted a small glowing object hovering above the island. According to West Juneau resident Wayne Smallwood Jr., he and a friend were near Cedar Park about 11 p.m. watching the moon through telescopes when a small, glowing object was observed near the top of a telephone pole. Smallwood said that the object appeared to recede and then come closer to where they were until it appeared through the telescope about the size of a dime. He said that another friend observed it through a zoom telescope and noticed that it had 2 green points on each side. I looked through it also, said Smallwood, and it looked like a bright, boiled egg yolk with a needle stuck through it. The points on each side were giving off a green glow, which would get brighter, then duller. He said that 3 other individuals also reported seeing the mysterious object, which remained in sight for an estimated 20 minutes. UFOs reported Monday. From the Ketchikan, Alaska News, March 19th, 1974. Ketchikan area residents reported unidentified flying objects near Ketchikan Monday night. Dr. Gary Carlson reported a sighting on Mountain Point, and unidentified people at the ferry terminal area said they saw a UFO Monday night. The Ketchikan physician and his family said they watched an object south of the city for about 10 minutes. The doctor said it was moving east to west at a high rate of speed, stopped suddenly, then reversed direction. The physician described the object as disc-shaped. He said it made several back-and-forth movements and glowed from gray to red to bluish green before fading from view in a southerly direction. About an hour later, a group of people at the Ketchikan Ferry Terminal said they saw another object low on the horizon. Coast Guard and Federal Aviation Administration officials said there were no reports of aircraft in the vicinity at the time. UFO sightings reported here. From the Anchorage Daily News, May 14, 1977. Bright objects hovering together in Anchorage skies were reported last month by a Northwest Orient airline crew and a radar approach controller at Anchorage International Airport. Reports of the eerie sight have been confirmed by the Federal Aviation Administration. This tale of a UFO sighting has all the elements of an Arctic science fiction thriller and was uncovered by KANC radio announcer who has been reporting on the event for the past 2 days. According to Fullerton, who interviewed major witnesses, air traffic controller Terry Sigrist first spotted 4 objects spaced equidistantly apart on April 23rd. He says the objects first appeared on his radar scope about 30 miles east of Anchorage, moving slowly. They came to a complete stop, picked up speed, and zipped off to the east, Sigrist said. Fullerton then talked to controller Harry Fluharty, who was in contact with a Northwest Orient airline pilot shortly afterwards. The pilot reported seeing only one bright object flying at 60,000 feet and moving at a high rate of speed. "I'll probably be sorry for reporting this," the pilot said, but told Fluharty that the object was moving faster than anything he had ever seen. In contacting the FAA, Fullerton confirmed the reports. An FAA spokesman said, "One of our radar approach controllers did report on April 23rd that he observed 4 blips which gyrated on the radar scope in an unusual manner. The controller saw the blips settle downward, then move across the scope at a rapid rate of speed." The FAA spokesman also confirmed that the airline crew reported the UFO, but said the spokesman, "It might have had some natural explanation, and I wouldn't overplay it. I don't want people to think that the FAA sees little green men." Strange lights blaze across Alaska night sky. From the Anchorage Daily News, October 30th, 1985. Something was out in the sky Tuesday night. Lots of people saw it. They were impressed. They called Anchorage Police, Alaska State Troopers, the Air Force, Anchorage International Airport, the National Weather Service. They called each other. They called the newspaper. Federal Aviation Administration air traffic controllers said it was a meteor shower. All other officials echoed that explanation. But that was a paltry, and in one case at least, entirely too normal explanation of what people from Cantwell to Soldotna saw about 10:30 p.m. By their own accounts, the watchers of the night sky were treated to a display of celestial pyrotechnics, a Roman candle writ large. It was, one eyewitness said, the most amazing thing I've ever seen in the night sky. Mike Jansek was on the Parks Highway adjacent to the Wasilla Airport when he saw a lead object, bright white, trailing other objects. The phenomenon, Jansenek said, was headed southeast, but not moving all that fast, at a rate similar to a jet at 30,000 feet. A hillside resident described it as weird stuff, a slow-motion, multicolored meteor shower. He said the lights were blues, reds, whites, with tails, not high up in the sky at all. "It would have to be a satellite," said a resident of South Anchorage. "It was too slow to be anything else. It was one item, then basically burned up. It was very bright. It took about 25 seconds to traverse the visible sky." From Raspberry Road, it was low, about 5,000 feet. There was no sound. It moved from northwest to southeast. It looked like several pieces breaking up. Troopers reported sightings as far north as Cantwell and as far south as Soldotna. Piecing the sightings together, What began as a line became a single, large object that fragmented as it moved northwest to southeast. It didn't make any noise, and it didn't move very fast, and it wasn't all that high in the sky. The fragments were all different colors. Some people said the biggest part of it seemed to explode. Everybody said all the lights just went out. And then there's what Steve Stevens saw while sitting in his car at the intersection of Spinnard Road and Minnesota Drive. He and his wife sat there all the way through the green light watching it. They saw, Stevens said, what looked like the body of an airplane without wings, with 3 lights and sparks like a sparkler. The body, he said, was about 3 times the size and length of a 747, and kind of a glittery gray-black. It was, he said, holding a level plane, not falling. Then, Stevens said, it vanished. It disappeared. It was, Stevens said, the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. Meteor or guided cone? It has Alaskans guessing. From the Oakland Post-Inquirer, Tuesday, July 4th, 1950. The Alaska Air Command issued a bare announcement today that a flaming object that flashed across the sky over Fairbanks Saturday night was a meteor. However, the Public Information Office at Ladd Air Force Base here indicated that investigation of the phenomena would be continued. Many civilians and military personnel reported sighting the object. Several persons said it appeared to resemble a guided missile. Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, chief of the Alaskan Command at Anchorage, said planes couldn't get off the field fast enough to track the object. He expressed doubt that it was a guided missile. Don McCune, a Fairbanks radio announcer, said he and his family spotted the Saturday night thing. He said it was shaped like an ice cream cone. It was about as round as a washtub and flew parallel with the earth, McCune said. From its rear end, we could see exhaust flames of blue and orange. I stopped the car so we could get a better look, but it vanished before I could get outside. Mel Lejeune, a University of Alaska student from Seattle, said he and several companions sighted the object streaking up from the horizon. It appeared to be rising gradually, and as it passed over us, it was about 2,000 feet off the ground, he said. After it passed us, it leveled off and disappeared to the north of us. It was going so fast we couldn't tell what it was. But about 30 minutes later, a jet plane flew past and this thing traveled much faster. General Twining said there was no jet or rocket-like trail behind the object, but it did have a little tail like a shooting star. The general had no reports on the object sighted Saturday night. New saucer sightings. From the Anchorage Daily Times, August 26, 1972. After several years of quiet in Alaskan skies, flying saucers are back. Unidentified flying objects sighted south of Norton Sound last week are the subject of investigation by the Army, the Daily News learned Friday. Around midnight, August 16th, Sergeant John Chimuk, an Eskimo scout in St. Michael, and his wife spotted what they described as a large elongated object in the shape of a football flying through the sky at a rate slower than an airplane. The object had a cockpit on top, a large window, and red lights at the front and rear, they said. Mrs. Chimuk watched the object land and after about 5 minutes take off again. She was afraid to go near, National Guard Information Officer Sam Alkin said. The following day at Stebbins, a village about 10 miles northwest of St. Michael on Norton Sound, some 20 residents, including Gabriel Bighead and Eskimo Scout Sergeant Pius Mike, saw an object in flight they couldn't identify. Sergeant Mike filed a sighting report to the Guard's 1st Scout Battalion headquarters in Nome, and as soon as the weather cleared last Monday, Captain Tom Williams, an Army advisor to the Scouts stationed in Nome, flew to St. Michael. Williams reported that he saw a depression in the ground which Chimuk said was made by the saucer, Alkin said. He described the spot as 3 feet in diameter, 2 inches deep and full of water as it had been raining. Burned grass was at the bottom of the hole, Williams said, adding that he had an eerie feeling when he left the site after taking photographs and samples of the soil, grass, and water. The samples were sent to the Army Corps of Engineers for testing. While waiting for the results, the Army is studying a sketch of the UFO made by Chimuk. The last time mysterious sightings were made in Alaska was about 5 years ago, according to informed sources. At that time, a saucer with red and white flashing lights was reported maneuvering over Barrow during a power failure, and several Anchorage residents also reported seeing strange flying shapes in the sky over the Chagos Mountains. UFO? Residents say yes. Officials call it a plane with banner. From the Anchorage News, April 21st, 1980. A bright, lighted object over South Anchorage Friday night sent as many as 50 local residents scrambling for their telephones to report that an unidentified flying object was in the area. The Federal Aviation Administration, Anchorage Police Department, and Alaska State Troopers all reported receiving phone calls from the local residents about the object, which FAA duty officer Bill Schofield claims was an airplane towing a lighted banner. But at least 4 local residents who saw the object vehemently disagreed that it was in any way similar to a conventional airplane. You could see the lights inside. It kept going in circles, said Doris Coles, who lives at 9110 Golovin Street. Coles and her 2 sons all saw the alleged UFO, she said. You could see it really clearly when you first looked at it through binoculars, she said. You couldn't hear any noise. It was really quiet. Coles described the object as round, and that it tilted in different directions like a flying saucer. Coles said she's never been a believer in UFOs before, but she's a believer now. Don Coles, Doris Coles' son, said he saw the airplane towing the banner Saturday night, and that it was not the object he saw Friday night. That was nothing like I saw the night before, he said. I've never seen anything like it before. Meanwhile, another local resident who asked not to be identified said he and a group of friends saw an object hover about 30 feet off the ground over the Diamond Estates Mobile Home Park, 1200 West Diamond Boulevard. It had lights that kept spinning around, the man said, adding that in no way was the object a conventional aircraft. You didn't hear any sound from it, the man said. A student at Wendler Junior High School says he also saw the object at Diamond Estates Mobile Home Park, and that it wasn't an airplane. I've seen that plane that tows the banner, said the 13-year-old Chris Pren, who claims that what he saw was different. It wasn't an airplane. It was just hovering, he added. He also described the object was round with lights and that it made a light moaning noise. I had the impression that it was oblong, Schofield said, adding he determined it was the plane towing the banner because some callers had described the object as moving in a waving or undulating manner. Lieutenant Wade Lacey of the Anchorage Police Department said officers on duty also determined that the object was the airplane towing the banner. I haven't seen any little green men running around, so I'll have to believe it was an airplane, Lacey said. Amber lights appear again over Anchorage. From the Anchorage News, February 19, 1985. West Anchorage skies Monday were dotted with a flock of bright and unexplained amber lights. The lights, which appeared at about 9 p.m., were apparently very similar to those that floated over Spenard's Sunday evening, but spectators and officials were at a loss to explain the source of the lights. There were a couple of lights, but we couldn't tell what they were, said Roger Carpenter, team supervisor at the Anchorage International Airport Control Tower. We didn't see anything on the tower radar. Federal Aviation Administration reports that the Sunday lights were from hot air balloons, were denied by balloonists. As many as 12 lights appeared in the western sky Monday. Some of the lights glowed alone in the sky, while others appeared in crude designs or in straight lines of 3 or 4 lights each. The lights appeared to climb slowly into the sky before hovering and then disappearing. They faded about 30 minutes after they appeared. A number of Anchorage residents apparently spotted the mysterious lights both Sunday and Monday night. On Sunday, skywatchers called Anchorage Police, the United States Air Force, and the FAA. On Monday night, police got even more calls. Randy Good, communications supervisor at the Anchorage Police Department, said about 30 people reported the lights Monday night. Some of the same officers who saw the lights Sunday night saw them again tonight and said, "Yep, that's them," Good said. Chris Hansen, who spotted the lights Sunday night when driving through Spenard, said he saw distinct balls of light moving over town. At first, he said, he thought they were from something from the Fur Rendezvous celebration, perhaps flares or a child's trick. "I thought it might have been little kids putting candles in paper bags," Hansen said. But seconds after the first lights appeared, another moved slightly across the sky, slowed, and joined the first group, he said. Then another came and hovered near the glowing flock. "That was something that little paper bags and candles can't do," Hansen said. "I've never seen anything like it," said Jim Minton, a commercial pilot. Minton and his wife were driving with Hansen Sunday when all three spotted the lights. "We all felt it was extremely out of the ordinary." Following Sunday night's sightings, FAA officials declared the lights were perfectly ordinary. "The controllers spotted hot air balloons with their burners going on and off," said FAA spokesman Paul Stuckey. Because of the distance, those controllers were unable to identify any individual balloon Sunday night, he said. Local balloonists dismissed the FAA findings. Many balloon pilots Sunday night were attending the yearly banquet for the Alaska Air Mushers Association. The banquet was in Rabbit Creek and was still going when the lights were spotted, balloonists said. "Virtually all the commercial operators were at the banquet," said Mike Carnevale, owner of Balloon Central Station. "I heard that there were 10 to 12 lights. There is no way that many balloonists could have gone unaccounted for Sunday night." Balloonists flying in controlled airspace are required to radio flight officials and report their movements, Stuckey said. No such radio contact was reported Sunday night. Night-flying balloons are required by the FAA to carry strobe lights, pilots said. Flying without one could cost a pilot a flying license. "It's too easy to get caught," Carnevale said. "A balloon at night lights up the sky, but it looks like a 7-story light bulb, not like a group of streetlights." Although witnesses contacted Monday about the sightings were anxious to talk about the lights, they were reluctant to guess what the lights might have been. "One part of me still feels like it was a prank with kids and paper bags and candles," Hansen said. "But another part of me said it was something else. But I tell you, I'm going to go to the library and check out everything I can on UFOs. I'm interested now." Cantwell area residents report mysterious white light. From the Anchorage News, January 13th, 1985. Cantwell area residents reported this week seeing a blinding white light pass overhead and vanish over the mountains. "It was not an aircraft," said John Wallace, who saw the phenomenon Tuesday night while he was stopped at the Reindeer Mountain Lodge on the Parks Highway. It lit the sky up for 30 or 40 seconds and completely illuminated the mountain range around it for 15 or 16 miles. Wallace, who has spent 13 years checking Alascom's microwave sites along the highway, said he has never seen anything like the light before. "It was passing overhead, quite fast, about 3 miles up," he said. "It climbed over the mountain and disappeared," Wallace said. At first he thought it was a nuclear flash of some sort, but it lasted for a long time, he said. "All I could see was the light, no shape or anything. I have no idea what it really was. I called Clear Air Force Base but they wouldn't tell me anything. Someone must have tracked the thing. Jack and Shirley Lawson, who run the Reindeer Mountain Lodge, said several people had seen the light. "I didn't actually see it moving," said Shirley, "but I saw it behind the mountain, and the mountain was completely illuminated as if the sun was rising right then, but it was white, like floodlights. I thought maybe there were 10 or 15 snow machines driving around back there, but it wasn't moving." Leon and Elizabeth Smith, who run the Igloo Lodge at mile 188 on the Parks Highway, said that they did not notice the light this week, but they have seen something like it in the past. "I'm not a believer in UFOs, but there have been some strange things in the sky," Elizabeth said. "We've seen a very bright white light hanging low around treetop level. It fades in and out, but it doesn't look like it's moving. It's very beautiful." The Smiths, who refuel helicopters at the lodge, were positive that the light was not an aircraft. "It was very, very bright," said Leon. "I thought at first that it might be a helicopter's landing lights, but it was just a white light, no red ones, and it was stationary. I watched it for an hour one time when I was refueling some military trucks that were here. The drivers were watching it too, and none of us could tell what it was. It was beautiful, though." A night flight to remember. Veteran JAL pilot who never believed in UFOs does now. From the Anchorage Daily News, January 5th, 1987. A full moon shone in the Arctic sky as Captain Kenju Terauchi took off from Iceland November 17th in a Japan Airlines cargo jet loaded with French Beaujolais wine. He was bound for Anchorage, on a route across Greenland to Ellesmere Island, Canada, over the Beaufort Sea, then into Alaska airspace above Fort Yukon. For the first 2.5 hours, the flight, crewed by Terauchi, co-pilot Takanori Tamafuji, and engineer Yoshio Tsukuda, was uneventful. The sky was clear and the winds, except for some light gusts over Greenland, calm. Then Terauchi's jet cruised into Alaska, and he first saw the two belts of light. They were an estimated 3 miles ahead of the plane, slightly to the left of the pilot's cockpit seat, and 2,000 feet lower than the plane. They emitted a steady amber glow. They hovered almost stationary, shifted from side to side, then pulsed across the sky in abrupt bursts of speed. The object, Terauchi believes, were not made by humankind. They were of a very high technology and intelligence. The events recounted by Terauchi in the 50 minutes after the first sighting of lights are some of the most bizarre in Alaska aviation history. Since first becoming public in late December, the reports have transformed the soft-spoken 47-year-old Anchorage-based pilot into an international celebrity, interviewed by People magazine, Tokyo Television, and more than a dozen other national and international publications. Terauchi has lived quietly in a comfortable house in Anchorage, his base for the last 3 years. He spends several weeks a month flying polar routes between Europe and Alaska. During his time off, he enjoys fishing for red and silver salmon. This week, Terauchi is home again. His phone rings often with reporters eager to hear about his strange November flight. Terauchi has an impressive list of professional credentials to lend weight to his rather incredible tale. He has 29 years of flying experience. He says he hasn't often navigated the Iceland, Greenland, Anchorage route, but he has routinely flown other transpolar routes. Until November, Terauchi says he never believed in UFOs. Now he does. He thinks they're sent by visitors from outer space. In fact, last Sunday, Terauchi again reported mysterious lights of a spaceship during a flight to Anchorage. This time, however, he admits he made a mistake. He now concedes that there was a more terrestrial explanation to what he saw. He agrees with Federal Aviation Administration officials who speculated that the second sightings were the lights of villages reflected off of ice crystals in the atmosphere. But Terauchi remains convinced that the lights he saw in November were spaceships of some unknown extraterrestrial origin. In interview after interview, he methodically makes his case. charting the events of the sighting on flight maps of the Arctic sky. One day, he's convinced someone else will see the crafts and his account will take on new meaning. I think we have to keep this record. Terauchi's encounter began with his sighting of the two belts of amber lights. To check them out, he radioed Anchorage air traffic controllers. The controllers replied that no military or civilian flights were in the vicinity. The two belts of light continued to dance in front of the plane. Terauchi grabbed for his camera, but realized that taking a picture would be futile because there was not enough light to expose the film properly. 5 minutes after the lights first appeared in front of the plane, they suddenly moved farther out ahead of the plane, he said. He could then make out the shapes of the crafts, cylinders wrapped in lateral lines of light that extended from a darker center. The lines appeared to be exhaust outlets, and they alternately pulsated light from the two sides of the cylinder. They appeared to be controlled by computers, he said. As the two objects reversed direction, the exhaust lights appeared to flare brighter. Co-pilot Tamafuji, in a separate interview, also reported seeing the two strange lights. I saw several lights in front of us, and then I couldn't see them, and the captain told me they were on the left-hand side, he said. After about 15 minutes, the first two lights disappeared, Terauchi said. Then, on his left, he saw a big band of glowing white light, similar to the light emitted by a fluorescent bulb. He turned on his weather radar and turned it to a 20-mile radius. At 8 miles, on the left side of the screen, the radar showed a tiny ball. Terauchi radioed the FAA Flight Control Center in Anchorage. 3 controllers monitoring radar saw what they thought was an object at about the same reference point on their monitor, according to Sam Rich, an air traffic controller, and Paul Stuckey, an FAA spokesman. Stuckey, however, said subsequent examination of the radar tape showed the object to be a split image of the JAL plane. Rich said none of the controllers at the time thought that was the case. As the plane flew over Fairbanks, the lights of the city gave Terauchi a better view of the new object. He says the band of lights circled a huge walnut-shaped object that appeared to be twice the size of an aircraft carrier. As the lights of the city faded, Terauchi again could see only the white band of light. To try and lose the object, he got permission from a controller to descend from 35,000 feet to 31,500 feet. The object ascended in formation, he said. Then Terauchi, after consulting with the controllers, made 2 45-degree turns to the right, then completed a 360-degree turn. The object remained in view. As the JAL plane flew past Mount McKinley, controllers asked a Fairbanks-bound United Airlines flight to try to confirm the sighting. The United plane veered off to follow the JAL flight path at a lower altitude. Just before the two planes passed one another, the white light disappeared. It was like a dream. Unbelievable, Terauchi said. Mulling things over in the living room of his Anchorage home, Terauchi postulates that whatever he saw was friendly. I can't understand the technology, but it was not dangerous. It was completely controlled. If he sees the objects again, he's ready to try communicating. Perhaps 4 blinks of the wing lights, then 2 more. In Morse code, he says that's high. Controller says unknown image tracked on radar. Image seemed to be following JAL cargo plane that reported sighting of UFO. From the Daily News, January 9, 1987. 3 air traffic controllers tracked on radar an image that seemed to be following the November 17th flight of a Japanese Airlines cargo plane, according to one of the controllers who helped monitor the radar. The captain of the JAL plane reported that an unidentified flying object was tailing his aircraft at the same location as the radar image. All 3 of us thought there was a track, said Sam Rich, a controller who has worked for the Federal Aviation Administration for more than a decade. A track is what air traffic controllers call the radar image of an aircraft. In previous news releases, The Federal Aviation Administration reported only one controller sighting the mysterious object, described by the crew as wavering lights on radar. That controller, whose name has not been released by the FAA, mistakenly interpreted a split image of the cargo plane as a second object, FAA officials said following a review of radar tapes. On Thursday, FAA spokesman Paul Stuckey said he had no knowledge of additional controllers who had tracked the UFO reported by the JAL's pilot and two-man crew. Captain Kenju Terauchi said the UFO tailed their plane for more than 300 miles as it crossed into Alaska airspace en route from Iceland to an Anchorage refueling spot. Terauchi told United Press International that he saw two brightly lit objects and a third enormous object, twice the size of an aircraft carrier, follow the plane. That report triggered a new FAA investigation of the incident and a burst of international publicity for Terauchi. Controllers have been interviewed by FAA officials, but until Thursday had not talked to the press. Rich said he was on duty for the half hour during which the JAL plane reported spotting the UFO. He said the JAL crew first contacted the Anchorage air controllers as their plane flew over Fort Yukon. They said something was following them. It appeared to be light, and appeared to be white, orange, and yellow, he said. Rich said the pilot sounded shaken. He was concerned. There was a quaver in his voice. Rich said the controllers immediately turned down their radar range to small scale that would better define the airspace around the JAL plane. There did appear to be a track near the plane about where he, Terauchi, said there was, so we kept looking. The track was not real strong, Rich said, but neither he nor any of his colleagues then thought it might be a split image. After spotting the track, Rich said he called the Military Regional Operations Control Center. They informed me that they had the same track. Another controller then told the pilot to make a series of turns and a descent in an effort to shake the UFO. Finally, as the plane headed south from Fairbanks, the controllers lost track of the UFO. Since the November incident, the FAA launched a major review of the radar tapes, initially confirming the controller tracking, then dismissing it as a split or double image of the JAL plane. Rich confirmed that double images often occur on the FAA radar screen, which relies on computer-generated data. But the plane didn't fly through the areas where the split images normally occur. The JAL pilot isn't the first pilot to report strange things in the Northern Corridor. During the past decade, there's been about a half dozen reports of unidentified lights from civilian and military pilots. It's pretty real to them, the pilots, Rich said. Those flying saucers keep coming back. From the Cordova Times, January 22, 1987. There was a recent spate of news reports about 3 UFOs that intercepted a JAL cargo jet near the Canadian border and followed it across the skies of Alaska. According to the pilot, the largest object was about the size of 2 aircraft carriers, and it was accompanied by 2 smaller companions. The pilot says that he made a complete circle in the sky, and the UFOs continued to pursue him. Turning off the cockpit lights convinced him that they were not reflections from the windshield. No plausible explanation has yet been set forth. The story is reminiscent of the flying saucer craze of the late 1940s and 1950s. Of course, sensational accounts of UFOs are still common fare in tabloids such as the National Enquirer. It all began on June 24, 1947, when Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, was flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington. As he approached Mount Rainier, he reported that 9 circular objects, moving at high speed in a step-back formation, passed his plane at a distance of about 25 miles. Arnold told a reporter that they flew like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. Thus the term born, and thus the mania began. Soon, saucers were reported from all across the nation and in several foreign countries. It was a huckster's holiday. 2 Tacoma men reported a weird donut-shaped craft that spewed forth lava-like rock on an island a few miles offshore. Pressured to investigate, the Air Force dispatched a B-25 bomber to the scene and found nothing. But on the return trip, the left engine caught fire, and although 2 crew members managed to bail out, the 2 officers in the cockpit were killed in the ensuing crash. The Tacoma men later confessed that their story had been a hoax. In January 1948, Captain Thomas Mantrell was flying his P-51 fighter near Fort Knox, Kentucky, when he radioed that he was going in pursuit of a round, white object above him. His last message was that he would follow it 20,000 feet, and if he could get no closer, he would abandon the chase. Apparently, he blacked out at around 30,000 feet and spiraled into the ground. Naturally, stories such as these only reinforce the hype that the UFOs were manned, creatured, by beings from outer space that had destroyed their pursuers. Pictures of flying saucers repeatedly cropped up in the newspapers and in pulp magazines. Because there were those who maintained that the saucers were of some sort of secret military development, the Air Force was inevitably drawn into the controversy. At the time, it seemed conceivable that UFOs might be Soviet reconnaissance vehicles, possibly developed with advanced technology obtained from German scientists captured at the end of World War II. Consequently, the Air Force initiated a study that involved more than 10,000 UFO reports and lasted more than 20 years. To the disappointment and skepticism of true believers, it was finally concluded that with few exceptions, the reports could all be attributed to explainable phenomena such as weather balloons, bright celestial bodies, ball lightning, or meteors. But the subject wouldn't go away, and still hasn't, as witnessed the recent JAL event. In 1966, at the request of the U.S. government, the University of Colorado undertook a controversial 2-year UFO investigation funded by U.S. Air Force research grants. The study, called the Condon Report after Dr. Edward Condon, the project manager, was marred from the outset by the attempts of a group of UFO believers, including one Congressman, J. Edward Rausch, to discredit the Colorado effort. One result was that the congressman arranged for a fervent UFO believer, James McDonald of the University of Arizona, to select a group of 6 scientists to testify before the House Science and Astronautics Committee, of which the congressman was a member. 5 of the scientists were strongly pro-UFO, while the 6th, Carl Sagan, was mildly so. Sagan has since become a skeptic. The object of this lopsided testimony was, of course, to obtain massive funding for more UFO investigations. The effort did not succeed. In the end, the Condon Report revealed little that had not already been said. There were a few instances in which a rational explanation of a UFO sighting could not be found. But these were nearly all cases that occurred in the early days of UFO mania, and the trail had grown cold. In the vast majority of cases, the sightings could be attributed to perfectly natural phenomena, but the report did little to settle the matter conclusively and satisfied nobody. As for the recent Alaska incident, it is interesting that the early sensational reports indicated that Air Force radar had tracked the UFOs trailing the JAL jet. In more subdued tones and smaller headlines, it is now learned that the Air Force attributes what was seen on the screen to radar scatter. As a personal aside, I am a UFO sighter myself. In the early 1950s, I was a high school student living on a farm in Nevada. The craze was in full swing. One day, I looked up and saw this round, silvery thing high overhead. I wanted desperately to believe in UFOs, and being an amateur astronomer, had a 4-inch reflector telescope stored in a corner of my room. I got it and ran outside, focused, and saw, much to my disappointment, a very nice weather balloon with an instrument package dangling beneath. Strange sighting over Alaska revives UFO debate. From the New York Tribune, January 29, 1987. The media's recent interest in a UFO incident in Alaska has shown that flying saucers are still alive and kicking. Despite 4 decades of official ridicule and academic indifference, it takes just one new good case to bring back again for public appraisal the old UFO question. Captain Kenju Terauchi's Japan Airlines Boeing 747 cargo jet flying across the Arctic Circle between Reykjavik, Iceland, and Tokyo provided just that case. The incident occurred on the evening of November 17, 1986, yet it wasn't until New Year's that the story was leaked to the press. The Federal Aviation Administration and the U.S. Air Force acknowledged initially that the UFO had been detected by ground radar in Fairbanks, Alaska. On January 4th, FAA spokesman Paul Stuckey admitted the agency was conducting a formal inquiry of the event and had interviewed the JAL crew for a second time. The official investigation of the radar tapes later labeled it an artifact, which in radar jargon means a ghost, in this case the 747's double image. Nonetheless, it was, in the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek's classification, a radar visual case. Captain Terauchi insisted he saw a very big object, approximately 2 times bigger than an aircraft carrier, as well as 2 smaller objects, which paced his plane for 400 miles during at least half an hour. The co-pilot and flight engineer also saw the UFO lights. JAL Flight 1628 was flying en route to Japan on a routine cargo haul between Iceland and Anchorage. The 747 was cruising normally at 525 knots at 35,000 feet when around 6 p.m., Terauchi sighted 2 columns of light, about a mile ahead and some 30 degrees to his left. The pilot radioed the control tower at Anchorage to check if there was any other air traffic. Anchorage responded in the negative. Suddenly, the lights came to within 500 to 1,000 feet of the plane, said Terauchi. He described the lights as 2 dark cylinders with row after row of spinning amber lights, which cast no shadows. I was sure it wasn't another plane, he said later in an interview. It moved so quickly that I realized it was not something human, but had to do with very high technology, very high intelligence. Stranger things continued to happen. A blip was detected on the 747's weather radar, and the cylinders flew in formation with the jet. At this point, FAA spokesman Stuckey explained later, Terauchi's main concern was trying to determine whether he was overtaking another aircraft. The captain then requested from ground authorities permission to take evasive action, which granted it and proceeded to give him instructions. The Boeing dropped 4,000 feet and made several turns, but the lights were still following us, said Terauchi. Near Fairbanks, Terauchi glimpsed a huge, round object about the size of 2 aircraft carriers. He later speculated it was a mothership of possible extraterrestrial origin. Co-pilot Tamafuji and flight engineer Sakuda, however, did not see the large UFO, although they did see unusual lights pacing the plane. The lights finally vanished at 6:53 p.m., and Flight 1628 landed in Anchorage without further incident. FAA officials interviewed the crew, releasing a statement to the effect that they were normal, professional, rational, and had no drug or alcohol involvement. When the story was finally leaked, both the Air Force and the FAA admitted that ground radar blips had been detected around the time of the JAL sighting. The Air Force soon dismissed them as electronic clutter. The FAA and the military use the same long-range radar in Fairbanks, but the FAA also uses a sophisticated computer system to remove clutter from radar images. FAA ground records indicated that something stayed close to the JAL 747 for 32 minutes. This radar evidence was also dismissed by the FAA as the plane's double image. This writer decided to go behind the headlines and seek the opinion of one of the top scientific experts in the UFO field. Dr. Richard Haynes, employed by NASA since 1967 as a research specialist in human perception with regards to avionics, works currently at the Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California. Dr. Haynes is also an accident investigator for the FAA and the National Transport Safety Board. In addition, he is a leading scientific ufologist, having published a textbook on human perception vis-a-vis the phenomena observing UFOs. He has also collected probably the world's largest catalog of UFO aircraft incidents, which presently contains over 3,400 bona fide cases. Reached by phone at his residence in Northern California, Haynes indicated he was investigating the Alaska case, having tape-recorded almost 3 hours of interview with him, Captain Terauchi, as well as with personnel from another airline, the FAA, the Air Force, the UPI correspondent in Alaska, and a number of other people. "The case is still open as far as I'm concerned," said Haynes, adding that he couldn't give a final verdict until completing the investigation. Nevertheless, Haynes summarized his assessment of the case. "Based upon all the information collected, I think it's a very solid case. It does not contain any electromagnetic effect on board the airplane other than radar contacts, but nonetheless, it is indicative of a very typical kind of encounter at high altitude." Dr. Haynes also explained some of the more arcane aspects of radar and aircraft technology. The Boeing 747 cargo model, he said, has an expand radar, which is primarily a weather avoidance system tuned or optimized to the weather molecules. In other words, it can pick up thunderclouds and so on. Dr. Haynes added, "Data I was given by the FAA indicated that there were some ground radar contacts of the object as well. However," continued the space expert, "later the FAA also changed their story and referred to it, ground radar contacts, as an artifact." Dr. Haynes explained that an artifact in science or engineering refers to some sort of misidentified end result. The investigator put it in plain English. They, the FAA, are trying to say that it was a malfunction or a very unusual occurrence. Haynes also referred to the maneuvers executed by both the JAL jet and its apparent pursuer. The object followed the 747 around almost a 360-degree circle, he said, and maintained the same position relative to the airplane all the way around, which I find is very interesting. Since the airplane was in about a 30-degree bank at 500 knots roughly, continued Dr. Haynes, it, the UFO, would have to be traveling a good deal faster than that, if it was a mile away and kept the same position from the 747. Finally, Haynes remarked that the Alaska case, I think, is going to turn out to be a very interesting one from the standpoint of a new pattern of lights that I have never heard of before, referring to the so-called cylindrical lights described by Terauchi as yellow, amber, and green, but not red, which is the international color for aircraft beacons. This writer also inquired of James Oberg, a Houston-based leading space writer and ground systems specialist, a well-known expert on the Soviet space program and a skeptical UFO investigator. Oberg has openly criticized the record of UFOs reported by pilots, characterizing them as poor eyewitnesses because of their concern for the safety of the plane and passengers. In various articles and lectures, Oberg has stated that pilots are trained to interpret visual stimuli in the most dangerous immediate terms. This has led, for instance, to cases where fireball meteorites hundreds of miles away were reported by pilots as near collisions. Oberg, however, conceded the Alaska case was a good one, even calling it extraordinary. Yet he pointed out that Terauchi's own statements to the press seemed to indicate that he was a UFO enthusiast. "It's my conclusion from that," said Oberg, "that he went into this experience with a substantial UFO lore background." Terauchi reported a second UFO during a JAL cargo flight over Alaska on the night of January 11th. He later admitted, however, that what he saw could have been the light of a town reflected off ice crystals. "This is not good for his credibility," remarked Oberg. On the other hand, there is nothing wrong with Captain Terauchi's professional record. He was a Japan Air self-defense fighter pilot and has 19 years of good flight experience. Haynes remarked that he, Terauchi, did a good job with the drawings and verbal descriptions of what he saw. Oberg also confirmed that the Alaska case doesn't have the characteristics of a space launch. He has gained quite a reputation identifying UFO sightings in South America, the USSR, the US, and elsewhere with specific space launches. I suppose we are looking at some kind of atmospheric apparition, said Oberg. This writer and Argentinian journalist Alejandro Agostinelli interviewed Haynes at length during a symposium of the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, a few months ago. The scientist outlined various reasons why aircraft/UFO encounters are of particular interest. Pilots are good observers, and they are in control of an airplane that can maneuver, said Dr. Haynes. This meant the pilot can do a number of maneuvers and observe the UFO, for example, from an Earth background. Another reason, continued Dr. Haynes, is that airplanes have many instruments on them: compass, radio, direction finder, inertial systems, so that the UFO effects might interfere or change the behavior of the airplane's systems. Haynes denied Oberg's criticism of pilots as UFO witnesses. Oberg criticizes cases by pilots on an engineering background in a very general way, while I do investigations one by one with one pilot at a time, to understand everything I can about him as a person, vision, physiology, health, mental health, motivation, training, family relations, etc., Haynes said. All these factors are taken into account before closing a case. Haynes' experience as an FAA and NTSB accident investigator comes handy here. Haynes has collected over the years a database of about 3,400 cases from commercial, military, private, and test pilots from most of the countries of the world, and which goes back to 1923. Approximately 70% are, in his opinion, bona fide UFO reports, and some 20% include radar contacts. The remaining 30% are cold cases from the Air Force's Project Blue Book, where he said the research was poor. The obvious IFO, identified flying object cases, have been deleted from the index. Dr. Haynes is currently working on a book that will summarize his research in this field. Hamburger-shaped UFO sighted. From the Fairbanks News Miner, August 27, 1987. Marilyn Gallagher wants to know if anyone else saw an unidentified flying object hovering over South Fairbanks early Tuesday morning. People are going to think we're nuts, she told her friend Evelyn Thornmalin, who also saw the hamburger-shaped object. Gallagher, 54, is visiting from Kenai and awoke about 4:30 a.m. Tuesday when she heard chatter on her friend's police scanner. People on the scanner were talking about an unidentified flying object hovering over Lakeview Trailer Court, she said. The house she was visiting was just a few miles from there, so Gallagher woke her friend and they went outside to look for themselves. It looked like a hamburger, she said. It was just a bright light. It just stayed there a long time. I saw a beam that went right up from the top of it, like a flashlight beam. It was too bright for a star and too close for a star, she said, but it was too high for a helicopter, and there was no sound, so it was no aircraft. Perhaps it was a weather balloon, she theorized. At any rate, she figured the military probably knew what it was. She watched the object for about 5 minutes, then went back to bed, so she didn't see it leave. Neither Alaska State Troopers or Fairbanks City Police knew anything about the object. Apparently, officers on duty during that shift did not note it in their log sheets. A spokesman for the Federal Aviation Administration also didn't know anything about the object. Of course, people think you're foolish if you say anything. But I don't care, Gallagher said. I was just interested. Villagers in English Bay report eerie UFO sighting. From the Anchorage Daily News, January 26, 1990. Winter nights tend to be pretty uneventful in English Bay, but Monday was nothing of the sort for a few residents there. UFOs don't often visit the tiny village. The encounter actually started about 4 miles away in Port Graham. Edward Anahonic was hauling some firewood on his four-wheeler to a friend's house at about 7 p.m. Monday when he saw an odd set of lights hovering above Bob McMullen's house. McMullen's home is on the western edge of the village. Anahonic, who lives in English Bay, thought it was a helicopter, but the lights were wrong and it didn't make a sound. He said it had red and blue lights and looked yellowish in the middle. It also had a spotlight that lit up the trees pretty good. It was shaped like a wing, he said, hovering over McMullen's house. Still, he thought it was a helicopter. Anahonic watched as the lights, about 150 yards away, moved slowly toward the beach. I wasn't scared, he said Wednesday in a telephone interview. I thought it came in for an emergency or something. I thought it was landing, he said. I ran down there with my Honda. When I got there was nothing. Meanwhile, in English Bay, Herman and Annie Tanape were out for a drive. English Bay is a village of about 180 people, nestled on a hillside overlooking Lower Cook Inlet. The Tanapes also take short jaunts around the village to combat cabin fever. It was a nice evening for a drive, windy and clear after weeks of clouds. It was about 7:40 p.m. They were half a mile from their home near the beach airstrip when Annie told Herman she saw a strange light. He didn't think much of it until he turned back toward the village. At first, I thought they were stars, he said. They were real bright. He drove closer to the lights, which he said were hovering no more than 50 feet above the ground. He said one was red, the rest were white. As he closed on the lights, they began to move away. He said the lights seemed to be responding to his movements. Every time he moved closer, they moved farther away. There was no sound. When they got within 700 feet, he said, the lights turned and darted away. It took off out to the ocean, like a jet, he said. Again, there was no sound, and that's what puzzled Tanape the most. If it was a chopper or a plane, we would have heard it. Even if it had a Honda engine, we would have heard it. The object, at that point appearing as a single red light, hovered at a distance over Cook Inlet. The Tanapes went to tell Vince Vaznikoff, the village president. Right away, Vaznikoff spotted a plane moving toward the village. They could hear its engines. Then, Tanape pointed out the red light hovering low over the inlet. We just saw a little bit of it, said Natalie Vaznikoff, Vince's wife. It was red, flying real low. On a windy day, the planes wouldn't fly so low. Everybody was too excited to even think to take a picture. Soon the light vanished. Vince Vaznikoff reported the incident to Roy Evans, English Bay's public safety officer. Evans went to the beach and scanned the horizon for about an hour. He saw nothing. But he believes the Tanapes and the Vaznikoffs did. People here are pretty honest, Evans said. They wouldn't make this up. Bill Radke, whose wife Sharon was the head teacher at English Bay School for 4 years, said the residents there would never concoct such a story. The Radkes live in Soldotna now, where she works as the school district's personnel director. They are wonderful, honest people, Bill Radke said. They are the most trustworthy people I have ever worked with. Robert Gribble, who runs the UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, said he hasn't heard anything about the sighting, but he was anxious to get some details and phone numbers. Gribble said he knew of no other recent sightings in the Northwest, and very few across the nation. It's been pretty quiet, he said. Evans said the sighting has stirred a lot of talk, and some fear, in the village. A lot of people are worried about their kids being out. But Edward Anahonic and Herman Tanape said they want to get another glimpse of the object. I'm going to keep an eye out for it, said Anahonic. I'll be watching. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. What state should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below. If you have your own scary story or close encounter to share, you can either send it in the comments, post on my subreddit, r/ihaveaspookystory, or send it to my Gmail, pinkpossiblystories@gmail.com. Maybe your story will be in a future video. And again, thank you to everyone for helping me get to 1,000 subscribers. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the shadows bite.